Conspiracy theories surrounding the recent demise of Pope Francis bring into focus the crimes committed by governments all over the world, including the United States government. And it all ties back to the hijacking of public health in a military operation to usher in the New World Order. Tonight, I'm taking you to Ground Zero, Rome, Italy, the Vatican, for the inside story. This is the Dr. Jane Ruby Show, and you're about to enter a whole lot of truth in medicine. Welcome to the Dr. Jane Ruby Show on this Monday, April 28th, 2025. Well, the world just witnessed a very controversial pope reportedly die and lie in state, while many world leaders, including President Trump, attended and paid their respects. But there's a lot more to the story, and it has a lot to do with the evil that's exploding in the world right now. And I couldn't think of anyone more prepared to discuss this issue and enlighten us than a scholar, expert on history of Catholicism, the Vatican, cultural anthropologist, and Franciscan monk, Brother Alexis Bugnolo, who himself has been persecuted, for his drive to tell the truth on so many levels, especially during the COVID fake pandemic. I'm sure he's got some bombshells for us tonight. And Brother Alexis joins me now. Brother, thanks for coming back. Welcome back to the Dr. Jane Ruby Show.
Thank you, Doctor. It's a pleasure to be with you, and especially be able to give authentic, real information about what's going on in Rome, because the mass media is not telling you the truth at all. They're spinning the narrative the way they want to go. Yeah. So Pope Francis died the day after J.D. Vance visited him, and they're at the Vatican on Easter Sunday, and they talked about immigration, and they had had a very bitter dispute, if you remember, in January and February over that. Pope Francis went so far as to deny the entire Catholic teaching on charity to refute J.D. Vance. That's what J.D. Vance said. But Pope Francis' kind of death was like a bookend on his life, because he was put into power by Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. And it's obvious that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance didn't want Pope Francis in power. And there he goes. He dies. So I'm not saying there was malfeasance. It could just maybe a heart attack and realize he wasn't wanted by his employers anymore. But you have to understand he was always a deep state candidate. Right. What Archbishop Bugnolo calls that there is a deep church just as there is a deep state. In other words, Masonic, because the Pope Francis was a Freemason. Even members of the Vatican staff admitted that. And most of the cardinals pushing his agenda are Freemasons. So he tried to replace our religion with globalism. Everything from taking a boat which illegal immigrants used and turning it into an altar to celebrate our religious rights upon, which is the most utter blasphemous thing you could do. Sure. You're not supposed to mix politics and religion. In the Catholic faith, we don't mix politics and religion. It's considered a sacrilege. So to talking about take the vaccine, it's an act of love. Sure. And writing encyclical letters to all the faithful about the green the green agenda and being responsible carers of the environment and opening the doors to immigration everywhere and welcoming immigrants. But he was a total hypocrite, because in the Vatican he had walls, he didn't tear them down, and he actually made the laws against immigration even stricter at the Vatican. Oh wow! So he was a real one rule for me, another for thee kind of person. And brother, he's a self-proclaimed. Tell people what his background is, his real name. He was raised as a communist, right? Tell us that. Yeah. Refresh the background. Okay, so his real name is Jorge Mario Bergoglio. And he is of Italian descent on both sides of his family, from northern Italy, Piedmont, which most of the popes have come from Piedmont in the last century. But his grandfather emigrated to Argentina, and there he was born. His family were good friends with the head of the Socialist Party from his childhood. And his entire thought is completely socialist and Marxist, always has been. He was a collaborator with the military junta. People that he didn't like, he fingered, so they were thrown out of planes. Six lay women were thrown out of planes at 30,000 feet above the Atlantic because he didn't like them. Oh wow! He was totally corrupt. He hid all the sexual abuse in his diocese. He promoted individuals who were involved in sexual abuse. He spent like $50,000 having a book published defending one of his friends who was involved in raping like 50 children. And even the Argentine court found this guy guilty
Right.
of raping these children. Did he ever apologize for spending the money of the church to defend that creep? No. He brought all the creeps to the Vatican, the ones, as long as they weren't people who stole money. But if they were caught with suitcases full of pornography, or if they were drug addicts, or if they had written pornographic books, or they had raped boys, he brought them in, and he made all these promises that he was going to reform the
Wow.
church. And
Wow.
what he did is expanded the bureaucracy of the Vatican, and he's run it into bankruptcy. He must have squandered like $4 billion, which is like 2/3 of the assets of the Vatican. The Vatican now is in de facto bankruptcy, a receivership.
Wow.
And he alienated all the big benefactors, because the Catholic Church relies on donations. And he alienated pretty much all the important populist leaders in the West. I say populist because a lot of governments in Europe are controlled by socialists, and they play so many shenanigans with their state-controlled TV and media that you don't know what's going on. Like Candace Owens recently did a report pretty much demonstrating that Emmanuel Macron's married to his own father. But you don't hear anything like that in Europe. It's all controlled state censorship. So
yeah, so good riddance, right? I mean, in a sense, this guy was evil.
he was the most evil, dishonest, crooked, perverted, and hypocritical man ever to be a pope at Rome. It is unbelievable what this guy did. The only thing you could perhaps compare is that we don't have any evidence yet that he personally was involved in some crimes that some medieval popes were involved in, like sexual excesses or murders.
Right.
But his friends definitely are. And people who tried to give testimony against his friends ended up murdered in Argentina. So, he was pretty darn bad.
So we know he's sort of an intelligence asset. He's been taken out. And you mentioned something, go into this, that the intelligence agencies of the world are all fighting and scrambling over who they're going to install next. And what's it going to look like? And who do you think it might be and all that?
Okay, so Donald Trump didn't go to Pope Francis's funeral in Rome just because he's a head of state.
Okay.
All the intelligence agencies in the world know that the Pope has the biggest influence for or against the Great Reset 2030.
Wow.
Now we know from the scandemic that the globalists control nearly all the governments and all the parties. So they all pretend to be different. When it came to scandemic, they were all lockstep together.
Right.
So their only the chink in the dragon's armor is the election of the next pope. If they get a man who's globalist, then they can proceed with the agenda. If they get a man who's anti-globalist, who understands it was not a pandemic, but a plandemic, scamdemic, who's against the COVID vaccines, who calls for a Nuremberg 2, they're going to have major problems. Their whole system is going to collapse. So Rome is now full of intelligence agents, and the cardinals are probably getting requests from all around the world to vote one way or not. Pope Francis appointed about 80% of the cardinals who are going to be in the next election.
Damn.
So we Catholics are very, very worried about what's going to happen. Now, just today, the Cardinal Dean, Monsignor Giovanni Battista Re, convoked the conclave for May 7th. It will go for as many days as is necessary that one candidate get 90 votes. He has to get 2/3 plus one of all the votes. There's 134 cardinals are being attended. And he's trying to rush the election. The insiders are trying to rush this election because they don't want the opposition to organize. And hopefully, when Trump came to Rome, he had a good talk with the American ambassador there to Italy and made it quite clear to them he doesn't want an open borders guy. So that's about the biggest hope, because Most of the
Mm.
cardinals who are not open borders are going to be anti-globalists. And see, this is
Well,
the problem
yeah.
for international globalism.
The
How do you get
problem is, we are now starting to, many of us over here in the United States are starting to fear and see serious signs, especially with the ushering in of new mRNA, that Trump is part of the globalist reset. That the rationale is they never would have accepted it from a Kamala. They could have made a Kamala win, but they put him back in, and since they put him back in, he speaks everything to the New World Order, digital money. He calls them freedom cities, but they're really smart cities to control you. The mRNA, actually having the audacity to march Larry Ellison into the White House on day 3 and say, we're going to create custom made mRNA, and we're going to ignore that a third of the nation was injured or killed. So I fear, is there any hope that this cardinal, conclave will, reset the world the right way, and not with
Well,
another globalist?
I think that the conclave is going to be what's called in politics reactionary.
Mm,
There's a widespread um, distaste for what Pope Francis did and tried to do. He got a lot of people in the clergy around the world to dislike him. You have to remember that the average Catholic bishop, the average Catholic priest, really doesn't have anyone that's helping him in his work.
mm,
He's fighting the cultural tide. He's preaching things like abortion is bad, sodomy is bad, you should get married and have children, don't cohabit. He's preaching a lot of values that aren't what globalism pushes. Uh, with the vaccine, it's now clear to anyone who has a brain that at least it didn't work, but it was deadly to lots of people. And so the clergy have learned just through enduring Pope Francis for 12 years that his approach isn't working.
mm.
Vocations around the world are just dissipating. People going to the church. I mean, something like a third of the Catholics in Switzerland have stopped going to the church. Something like
Mm.
15% of the Catholics in Germany stopped going to Sunday services. It's all around the world. So it's going to be reactionary because by the nature of an institution, the people who are been in it their whole lives, they want it to prosper. They want it to continue. And so the cardinals are going to want a pope that's going to go do something different than Pope Francis, something that's going to encourage the young people. So
Hmm.
there was some recent statistics that show that young people all around the world are flocking to more conservative and traditional
Yeah.
uh, services in the Catholic Church where those kind of clergy preach the more traditional and conservative values. So the cardinals, a lot of them are young. They want the church consist, but the big problem is the Vatican finances. They need a cardinal that's going to save the Vatican from the bankruptcy.
Hmm.
It means they need a cardinal. We're not going to get a cardinal from, if they're sane, we're not going to get a cardinal from a poor, tiny country. We're not going to get a cardinal from South America, Africa, or Far Asia
Interesting. Hmm.
because he wouldn't be seen as someone who could solve the financial problem, first of all. Second of all, he can't be a cardinal from a small country in Europe because even if he could solve the problem, he wouldn't have the connections to do it.
Hmm.
So I think it's highly likely. If I had to make a guess,
Hmm.
I think the most likely candidate is going to be an American cardinal who knows something
Really?
about finance. Only for this reason
Don't
is,
pick Donald Trump, and don't pick a Donald Trump type character. They
well,
get bought off. They're the
that's
billionaire
true.
club.
There are cardinals in the United States that totally love Joe Biden and
Oh,
oppose things. But if we get an American who's going to support Trump on immigration and who is against the totally scandalous behavior of Catholic charities and who doesn't want
right.
to take US aid money, then see, there are enough Catholics not involved in politics in the United States who could save the Vatican. For example, in the United States, we have an organization called Knights of Columbus,
Right.
which is an insurance company that works closely with Catholics if you want burial insurance, for example. And they have an $85 billion portfolio. So they could solve the Vatican's financial problems very easily. So that's one organization that's gonna have a very strong influence with the cardinals because they have a practical problem to solve.
I
First,
see.
keep the Vatican from going bankrupt.
But
Then they'll get involved in some. So we could see an elderly cardinal elected who can solve those problems.
yeah.
But I don't think we're going to get a raving globalist because right now the Vatican finances are in an absolute disaster because
Well,
Pope Francis is
what
always insulting American Catholics in the United States or
right.
conservatives.
What about
And
all the gold the Vatican has supposedly? Like sell some gold and dig
no,
out.
actually, the Vatican doesn't have much gold. I think the
Really?
last report said the Vatican Bank had 2.6 billion in assets, but it's mostly pension funds for clergy and stuff.
Do you think
No,
it's
the
an
Vatican
honest,
did.
was it an honest assessment, an audit? I mean, they're probably hiding half of it.
It went up $1 billion after Alex Soros visited Pope Francis.
Oh,
So,
that's interesting.
however, the Vatican didn't have a bank before 1944,
Yeah.
42.
Yeah.
Actually, it opened their first bank during the Second World War. But the thing with the Vatican is that the people who work there are not idealists that go there purely for the love of God and don't want a salary. Most of them are careerists who are trying to carve out the biggest pot of money for themselves. And this has been going on for like a century. So uh, increasing the bureaucracy like Pope Francis did, increased the number of salaries. And when he said last summer that there's a problem with our pension fund, it looks like it's going to go bankrupt. Everyone in the Vatican got worried, even the lay people there. So there's about 5,000 people work in the Vatican City State.
I see. Yeah.
And only about, I think, there's only 250 cardinals, and the cardinals don't all live at the Vatican. So at the Vatican, maybe 50 cardinals live. But the Vatican is basically the cardinals' clubhouse. So the fact that the pension fund is not solvent,
hmm
and the one put in charge of that is American Cardinal Farrell. He's actually Irishman, and he's told to try to save it, but you can't save it unless you have a man in the papacy who is a magnetic personality,
Yeah.
who inspires confidence, who is going to solve the problems and is going to clean house of what is causing the problem. So, for example, Pope Francis appointed to the section of the Vatican that handles doctrine, which used to be called the Office of the Inquisition. He didn't appoint a man who wants right doctrine. He appointed a man who wrote 3 pornographic novels in which Jesus has sex with an underage girl.
Oh my God. This is
the level of depravity of
right.
Pope Francis. So a pope who keeps that guy in, that's the end. Like the American, see, 60% of the Vatican income comes from Catholics in the United States who give
Interesting.
money.
Of course.
So if they don't get rid of that guy, that's the end of the Vatican. It's going to go bankrupt. And the globalists evidently don't want to financially save the Vatican. They're very
No,
tight.
no. And if they get control over whether it's by money and whatever of these cardinals, and they put a worse than Francis in there, I mean, we're kind of done because, this, I don't know I'm worried.
Yeah, well, we Catholics too are worried. We're worried that the conclave may not elect one man. We're worried that the conclave might elect 2 men because the cardinals won't agree among one another and they're going to break in groups of 2 and give us
Really? 2
Yeah,
popes?
it's possible because the differences are so overwhelming. You have one cardinal, for example, Cardinal Muller. He says the last thing we need is another pope like Pope Francis. And then you have a cardinal like Cardinal Parolin, who was Pope Francis' Secretary of State, who
Mm.
said on Sunday basically that we are mourning the death of Pope Francis, the way the 12 apostles mourned the death of Jesus Christ.
Oh my
You know,
God.
when you listen to blasphemy
I
like
was going to
that,
say, he's elevating him to Jesus. That's ludicrous.
it's at least ludicrous.
Bold.
From a religious point of view, it's absolute blasphemy.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like calling Barack Obama the Messiah. Like when he
Right.
first was elected, they started saying this guy's the Messiah. Then he knew his followers were, okay. So, but Pope Francis's followers are that way. I know someone who heard a priest at Turin say, "Oh, you shouldn't disagree with Pope Francis. Pope Francis is God."
Oh wow, that's a total
So there is a huge
yeah
difference on what's going on among these 135 cardinals. There are those who profess the Catholic religion, and there's those who profess globalism. And I don't see how they can agree with one another. So to win this election, you're going to need 90 votes. If any group has 45 votes and doesn't like a candidate, they can block the election forever, because the rules are you have to have 2/3 plus one. And there's no getting out of that. There's no after 10 days, if you can't agree with that, then a simple majority. No, that rule was canceled under Pope Benedict.
Okay, but we're talking about a CIA installation. Let's be real. Are those votes really going to matter? Isn't it just going to come out of the machine and who the intelligence communities want?
Okay, first of all, the votes are not counted by machine. They're written on paper ballots.
No, I mean the machine.
Sewn together. It is highly likely, yes, that since 80% of the cardinals were named by Pope Francis, and Pope Francis was a deep state agent, that they are also deep state agents. It's highly likely that is true. So, I don't have any information to say one way or the other. I would just say that the weight of the problems at the Vatican are going to encourage. See, nearly all the cardinals are newly made, have never been in the conclave, so they're one naive. But
I see.
There's a lot of people don't like the old guard that's in the Vatican.
Yeah.
And the Pope who gets rid of the old guard is going to make way for the new guard. And since most of the cardinals have never worked in the Vatican and would like to and can't unless the old guys are kicked out, they're going to favor someone who wants to clean house, even if he's not so ideologically different. And that's one of the factors. The second, to solve the financial problems. Most of these cardinals appointed by Pope Francis have no financial expertise or influence. So they're going to want to vote for someone who surely can raise the money, that surely has the contacts. So that's why I say it's highly likely we're going to get a conservative American cardinal.
You know what? Here's my prediction. We're going to have you back after the conclave meets in May. Dr. Jane's prediction is we get somebody worse than Francis. He's installed by the CIA, and the whole vote was BS. I'm not going to swear in front of a Franciscan monk. Okay. Well, that's it for part 1 of my interview with Brother Alexis Bugnolo, the American expat Franciscan monk, on everything that's going on right now in Rome after the death and burial of Pope Francis. Stay tuned for Wednesday night on the Dr. Jane Ruby Show, where we'll show you part 2 with a totally different focus on the fake lab leak theory coming out of Washington, Dr. Malone's letting the cat out of the bag, and what Brother Bugnolo has uncovered about President Trump. See you then.